and welcome to Macros with Mythili, the ET Now show that takes a hard look at all the major macroeconomic issues and developments in India and overseas. This week, we're going to take a hard look at an impending development, the appointment of a new SEBI chief. The appointment, which comes 6 years after the present chairman, UK Sinha, was appointed in February 2011, first for a 3-year term, which was then extended by 2 years, and then again extended by a year, comes under circumstances very different from when Mr. Sinha was appointed. Not only is regulation of the commodities market now firmly under SEBI, but technology has leapfrogged. Terms like HFT, high frequency trading, and co-location have become part of the lexicon of capital markets, and stock exchanges are getting set to get listed, all of which makes the challenges before any capital markets regulator particularly daunting. So what are the kind of qualities and qualifications that the Financial Sector Regulatory Appointment Search Committee must look for in its search for the right man or woman? Last July, when the government started the search process, it got 50 applications, shortlisted 7, but finally opted to give Mr. Sinha an extension, just a day before he was to retire. This time that option is not available. Sinha is already the second longest serving SEBI chief after D.R. Mehta. Hence the urgency to get the best person for the job. And joining me in this discussion are Sandeep Parekh, founder of Finsec Law Advisors, who keeps a close eye on developments in the financial markets, Anil Singhvi, founder chairman, Institutional Investor Advisory Services India Limited, a proxy advisory for institutional advisors, and Mohandas Pai, chairman, Manipal Global Education, and also a former member of the SEBI board. Welcome to the show, all three of you. Before we get into the nitty-gritties of the discussion, let me start by asking you, all three of you, something that has puzzled me for a while now. How come there seems to be so much less frenzy over the appointment of the SEBI chief as compared to the RBI governor? If you recall, the appointment of the present SEBI chief was actually challenged all the way to the Supreme Court before it was finally dismissed, something that we have not seen in the case of the RBI governor and hopefully never will. But very briefly, what to your mind explains the relatively low decibel debate over the appointment of a SEBI chief? Or is it just early days yet? Let me start with you, Mr. Pai.
Well, I would think that the market is a very different animal. There are too many people involved in the market, lots of money to be made, and it's an open system. And whenever people see something happening, some people want to challenge it for whatever reason, and they get recognition. Whereas the banking system is well regulated, fairly stable, smaller number of players, well controlled, and it's been there for a long period of time. It's not as dynamic as the stock market, right? And the stock market being dynamic, attracts many people, and so many people make their living, create huge amount of wealth, lose their wealth, and the emotion behind the stock exchange is enormous. So you'll always see that the appointment of the SEBI chief attracts greater attention in all constituencies among a variety of people, and some people, go to court to challenge. But I think that's a one-off event. I don't think it's something that will happen regularly. It happened for various other reasons. So, but I would think that, this is much more broad-based and impacts a lot of people directly. Yes, banking impacts more people too, but it's a very small industry in terms of number of players compared to the number of players who are there in the stock markets.
Sandeep, would you agree with Mr. Pai? Because he seemed to suggest that SEBI, in fact, the appointment attracts more attention because the market is so much more dynamic. Sandeep?
Yeah, I agree with everything Mohandas Pai said, because I think if you exclude NBFCs, RBI essentially regulates 50 persons or maybe 100 people, as opposed to SEBI, which is going after 9,000 listed companies alone, plus so many intermediaries, distributors, so virtually regulating lakhs of people. So it does end up being much more higher profile also because of the higher risk, because of market participation of retail investors. And finally, it's higher profile because SEBI is a much more transparent institution. If you see their orders, they come out in public domain, they're challenged in an appellate tribunal. RBI, even though their integrity is of course beyond reproach, it's a much darker institution. People don't really realize how they regulate people, how they enforce their writ. It's kind of more an informal market where they call up people and discipline them instead of formal orders. So I think SEBI is much more in the limelight, I would say. I really can't answer why the SEBI appointment is rather much lower profile than the RBI governor's appointment. But I think part of it has to do with the fact that the RBI governor is of course much bigger than the SEBI chairman, both in terms of rank and also in terms of the central banking which the RBI does. In fact, RBI says it's not even a regulator; it just happens to do some regulations. So they see themselves as a central bank rather than a regulator. And that obviously has a much deeper impact on people's lives.
Okay. Anil, let me ask you, do you agree with both of them, or do you think the media frenzy, even over the RBI's chief, the governor, was a really recent phenomenon and relatively a media creation? Would you agree, Anil?
Let's put it in perspective that RBI has been there for a much longer period than SEBI has been. So when you look at and compare the two regulators, according to me they are incomparables, because to compare RBI with the SEBI chief is not a really right comparison. But having said this, look at RBI's role. RBI's role and impact is much more in economy. Look at Fed and SEC. I mean, can you even recollect the name of chairperson of SEC versus Fed? So I think this is a global phenomena that a central bank chief is a far more impactful person. And you look at from the importance given by in the Indian statute as well, he's like almost a minister in a council of ministers, whereas the SEBI chief doesn't even have a role or a stature of RBI chief. But having said this, your point which you made, and maybe I'm jumping the gun here, that last year when this whole process had started and you got almost about 57 applications, and thereafter also you couldn't find a right candidate, and you given an extension to Mr. UK Sinha, though he's doing a very good job on that. But to take the view that yes, RBI we had in 3 years time, Raghuram Rajan, no extensions, here with Mr. UK Sinha, 2 extensions coming in. So there is definitely a bit of a confusion in the minds of the people who select a SEBI chief, that what kind of person they should be really looking for. And I think the debate should be very clear on that importance given to the SEBI chief should be, if not as much to RBI, which is unlikely to be, but at least it should be there that yes, it's a very important role. It touches the lives of millions and millions of people in terms of securities market, in terms of many more things to be coming in, and more importantly, when a common man is really impacted or affected is by SEBI regulations rather than by RBI regulations.
Absolutely. I do hope that confusion ends, because now we have a structured way of going about this election. But Mr. Pai, SEBI's objectives can be broadly classified under 2 heads: market regulation and development, and protection of investor interest. Which of these 2 roles is more important, do you think, in the Indian context? And on which of these do you think SEBI has delivered relatively more? Mr. Pai?
I think market regulation is the center theme of the SEBI mandate for a very important reason. If the markets do not behave properly, the markets are captured by vested interests and this manipulation of the market, I think the system will collapse. And investor protection is inherent in the market regulations. So the markets have to be well capitalized, well regulated, and the market should be liquid, trading should go on, manipulation should stop, and SEBI has to be very proactive. I think SEBI has done a wonderful job in market regulation and investor protection, which in my view go hand in hand together over the last many years. Because at the time of any crisis in the last many years, the markets have been relatively stable. They're not been like China, which has gone up and down for various reasons. Settlements have gone on, the market is liquid. There have been some crises, and we have weathered the crises. And whenever there's been some manipulation, the regulator has come down very strongly. I think both things have gone. In the area of development, which is part of the SEBI mandate, I think there is a little bit more work to be done for a simple reason. The equity cult and the equity investment has not become ubiquitous all across India. In many parts of India, people do not understand what equity is. They need to be educated, and the quantum of savings going into equity can be further increased. And equity as a part of the personal portfolio for most people is less compared to many comparable countries. So I would think in the area of development, maybe a lot more has to be done. But if you look at the history of when SEBI came into being, what the markets were. When SEBI started, the market was captured by a few people in Mumbai, the Mumbai brokers, and they had the tentacles in Delhi, in the political circles. And we know what all they did. And to get over that and to come to this stage, I think it's been an extraordinary achievement.
Oh, absolutely. We can always count on you to call a spade, Mr. Pai. But Sandeep, if you were to compare the US SEC's objectives with that of SEBI, there's an interesting difference. The SEC has a 3-part objective: to protect investors, maintain fair, orderly and efficient markets, and facilitate capital formation. Whereas SEBI's objectives have been defined as, and I quote, to protect the interests of investors in securities and to promote and develop and regulate the security markets and for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. There is no mention whatsoever of facilitating capital formation. Now, does that seem slightly odd in a country which actually needs to think of capital formation above all? Sandeep?
I think I find the distinction really more of semantics. I think both systems are supposed to create good market system which enables capital formation. So I don't think you can really say that merely because you're looking at development, investor interest and regulation, you're avoiding capital formation. Even in the West, I mean, the SEC doesn't really help with the capital formation. They just create the right dynamics for, they do two things essentially. One is enforce disclosure, and the second is go against fraud. I mean, these are the two key roles of any regulator, any securities regulator, and I think these two systems are applicable in India also. I mean, before 1988, if you saw, we had a merit-based system in which a Babu decided how much capital a company could raise. So we moved to the US system. So I think they're pretty similar, I would say, in terms of the philosophy and the outreach.
Anil, let me toss that question to you. Which of SEBI's main objectives do you think is more critical in the Indian context? And how would you assess SEBI's performance under its broad heads?
I think the advent of SEBI has been largely on account of looking at the fair practices in the securities market. Actually, if you recollect, before SEBI came in, the market practices were very shoddy in India because of physical shares, brokers not having any trust and confidence with the investor class and all that. So I think the SEBI's birth was largely to protect investors against the malpractices and shoddy practices which were prevalent in the market system then. So I think SEBI's role, if you look at last 20 years, has evolved over a period of time, and now SEBI is really looking at deepening the markets. And as Sandeep rightly said, that capital formation may be just missed out on semantics, but ultimately the goal and aim of SEBI is to really have the equity cult in India. India was never, I mean, though of course we had a stock exchanges for 150 years, but it has really not gone deep down. I mean, in fact, it was like a couple of cities like Bombay, Calcutta, Ahmedabad, Rajkot and all that, where you had an equity cult, but other than that, equity wasn't even a word heard by the masses in this country. So over a period of time, when we are looking at India being a very large potential of savings, and saving rates are very high, obviously it has to be channelized into the stock markets and it has to be channelized for capital formation. So SEBI's role has actually evolved over a period of time, and I think I would be willing, if I didn't say this word, that I think SEBI has done a very good job. In fact, in the last 15-20 years, if you look at disciplining the market and market participants, I think SEBI has done wonderfully well. In last 5-6 years under UK Sinha, I think SEBI has leapfrogged into many more areas, and I can talk endlessly about investor protection, and I think SEBI has done a wonderful job in last couple of years in placing many regulations which are really empowering the minority shareholders in this country. So SEBI's role has evolved very well, and I think going forward next 5 or 10 years, we would like to see in fact SEBI becoming more powerful, more present rather than omnipresent on that, and I think the capital formation is a consequence of all these factors.
Okay, so all three of our experts agree that SEBI has done a great role and it has a great future going forward. But on that note, it's time for us to slip into a very short break. So please do stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and we're discussing the impending appointment of a new SEBI chief and what is the kind of chief we need to ensure that our capital markets remain well run. Mr. Pai, before the break, Anil was talking about how SEBI has passed a whole lot of rules, regulations, strengthened the capital markets. And it is true that under Mr. Sinha, rules and regulations have been fine-tuned and strengthened. But when it comes to implementation, the story is a little different. If you contrast the way the SEC nailed Rajat Gupta, you know how they had investigations over a number of years before they finally pinned him on the charge of insider trading. Whereas SEBI had to drop the proceedings in the case of RIL for want of evidence, and after going through investigation for so many years. So is that kind of failure inevitable given the lack of staff, the lack of funds, and is that something that we have to live with at least in the short to medium term, Mr. Pai?
Well, I think if you look at execution of regulations and enforcement compared to the SEC, it is true that India is way behind, but that's because of the legal system. In the United States, when SEC comes and SEC takes action, most courts support it. They go to the court, take a subpoena, and then go after people, and they're able to prosecute them within 2 or 3 years. And in most cases, people will accept the charge of SEC without accepting the criminal charges and make peace with the SEC. They'll make a deal with the SEC. I mean, SEC does not criminally prosecute most people. Please remember that. They all make a deal and get on, and they get it because they know that the SEC is a powerful institution and will go all the way. And most court decisions go in favor of the SEC. The system there is very different. Whereas in India, the legal system is very dilated, etc. And two, the SEC has built up great expertise and surveillance system over a period of time. They've been there for more than 80 years. Please remember that. And SEBI has been here only for maybe 25 years. And SEBI has bolstered up its surveillance, bolstered up its capability. It is all a case of building capacity, and I think there is some way to go. But in the last 4 or 5 years, last 7 years, I think there's been a remarkable transformation in clamping down on insider trading, in malpractices, etc. So I think we are much, much better. Yes, SEC way ahead, but I think our legal system is to take part of the blame too. It takes too much of time, it goes all in all, and most of in the appellate system, there's a lack of proper appreciation of the securities market, and Sandeep said, semantics take over sometimes.
Yes, I agree. The legal system has a lot to answer for. But Sandeep, given the imbalance in the incentives between regulators and players in every system, is it perhaps a given that SEBI will always be one step or maybe 10 steps behind players who are determined to game the system? Sandeep?
Yes, I mean, again, just going back to the previous question first, I think SEBI has done a pretty remarkable job, if you ask me, and let me inject a little data into this this discussion. SEC has an enforcement staff of over 1,000 people, and entire SEBI strength is around 700 people, out of which maybe 70, 80 people actually do investigations. Sure. With that number, almost 10x the size, SEBI actually goes after 40, 50 insider trading cases versus 90 to 100 for the SEC. So that's so if you look at efficiency, we're kind of 5 times more efficient. And the second data point is again, it's a bit of a man bites dog syndrome. It gets into news, but every time SEBI wins a case in SAT, it's never reported. So in fact, the statistics are overwhelmingly in favor of SEBI. Almost 90% of cases are won by SEBI, not lost by SEBI, as some parts of media portray. Having said that, I think SEBI, of course, certainly has a long way to go, just like the SEC has a long way to go, and the judicial system has a lot to blame, and particularly criminal cases, which SEBI goes into regular sessions courts. They obviously face all the challenges which the criminal system throws at the common people. So I think criminal system has certainly failed the securities market.
Oh, that's true, certainly. I couldn't agree with you more. But Anil, you track corporate governance very closely. In the past few years, thanks to SEBI, as distinct from the New Companies Act, has corporate governance improved dramatically in the country? Anil?
Mythili, I think it's again a process, because what we have seen is the Companies Act 2013 having come and notified only in 2014, so it's just about 2 years. And thereafter, we have seen SEBI also taking leapfrogging for the listed companies. So I think in terms of regulations, most regulations are very good. They are protecting the minority shareholders. They are protecting against many malpractices which are there by the corporate sector in India, really not looking at creating the larger wealth for everyone. In fact, it's more of a larger wealth for only people who control the companies. So I think SEBI's role has been very, very proactive in this, and SEBI has done remarkably well in last 2 years in terms of reaching to a level where people start really looking at it, that regulations are there and regulations are favoring the minority shareholders, and which is actually, come to think of it, that people who have been saving oriented in India, who believe in keeping the fixed deposits with the banks and all that, they will come to the equity markets only when they think that they are well protected by the regulations, and there is a regulator which is SEBI today, which will protect them against any of these kind of malpractices meted out either by the brokers, who is the intermediary, or by the corporates. So I think in this case, SEBI has done a remarkable job, empowered by both Companies Act and, more importantly, the listing guidelines and regulations which are there in place today. I think SEBI has done a remarkable job, and going forward, I think whosoever is going to be the chief of SEBI for next 5 years, I think the larger role would be that only to look at what kind of empowerment we can have for the minority shareholders and small shareholders, so that larger savings are really channelized to the stock market, rather than just looking for fixed deposit and chit funds and all other things which we have in India. And we have seen that enough times there is more abuse in those than in the securities market today. So I think, like Mohan said, that I think we have to really go for investor education programs, deepening the awareness programs. This should be done by the Investor Protection Fund, which is getting a lot of money. Both BSE and NSE have a large pool of money in Investor Protection Fund. I think that money has to be utilized for channelizing towards educational programs. Even it could be conducted in universities. They can have the small short courses for people to get educated on equity investment. So I think next 5 years the SEBI chief's role is largely, according to me, should be, I mean, one side is of course discipline and regulation and vigilance, but more importantly deepening of the Indian stock market.
That brings me to my last question before we wind up really, which is to ask you, Mr. Pai, what do you think are the main challenges before SEBI, the new SEBI chief, and the SEBI as an organization? Very quickly, Mr. Pai.
Well, I think, enforcement action has to be accelerated in the sense that the time taken for enforcement has come down. There's a remarkable work that's been done. The backlog has been cleared. I think that has to be a focus. Surveillance has to be a focus because the market is becoming very sophisticated. With algorithm trading and all kind of things happening in the market, it's becoming very, very technology-led. And SEBI should invest more, should have more people, more qualified people to do that. And next, they must make sure that they focus on more development to the stock exchanges. There's enough money in the system, but there has to be much more feet on the ground, many more people acting. The universities, like Anil said, educational institutions and smaller towns have to come on board. And I think the SEBI must keep up the pressure it has on corporate governance. See, at the end of the day, I would say that the last 25 years, SEBI is a AAA organization. Great people, right from G.V. Ramakrishna, we had D.R. Mehta, we had Damodaran, we had Chandu Bave, now U.K. Sinha. Remarkable people, great leaders, very strong people, people of impeccable integrity, who are independent, who stood their ground and who protect their investors and were principle-based. So the next leader will be part of this, hopefully, and he will take it forward. So I think, the agenda is very set.
Okay, Sandeep, would you like to add to that? What do you think are the main challenges before the next SEBI chief and the institution? Is it just staff, enforcement, beefing up their technology? What else can you add to that, Sandeep?
So I would say SEBI needs a bit more of, needs to look into listed companies a bit more. I think they focus too much on intermediaries till now. So I think a forensic team would be financial forensic team would be extremely useful. They also need to, and just coming to the big picture really, I mean, appointing a chairman, I think they should get somebody from the market for a change, and I think it's a disservice to the market when somebody learns on the job, and as we've seen in SAT particularly, where we have a tribunal which is manned by people who come from completely different fields, and by the time they retire, they've learned the ropes of the market. So I think hopefully the SEBI chairman will be somebody who has at least market experience, if not from the market. And I hope he has a good 5-year term.
I don't like to add to that, but the fact is that in the past we've seen, except for Mr. Vajpayee, who came in fact from a completely different area, of course within the financial sector, he came from insurance. All the SEBI chiefs have been bureaucrats. Is that the best we can do? What kind of person should we look for? Somebody from the market? The SEC very often takes corporate lawyers, but who do you think would be best fit? Somebody who has a macro picture, an economist. In the case of the RBI, we always look for an economist. What do you think are the right qualifications for a SEBI chief? Anil?
I think as we have seen in RBI also used to have most of the time only IS officers coming and becoming governors. When we had Dr. Raghuram Rajan, we got a finance economist. We have now Urjit Patel, also a very good economist. So I think a similar kind of a change is really need to be brought in even in SEBI. It's not necessary that every time you have only the IS officers, but whosoever is a person, once is competent enough, understand the securities market, the depth of it, I think should be a good person to do this job. But having said this, I think we should be looking for a person, A, for the 5-year job, and B, who is very well versed. As Mohan rightly said, that there has been so much of technological change and advancement which is coming in. A person who has a very good and deep knowledge of the securities market, and more importantly for the corporates. Actually, today the job, as Sandeep rightly said, is to look at both intermediaries as brokers and others, and corporates. And there are, according to me, there are quite number of things which need to be now empowered with SEBI, like SFIO. Why should SFIO be there with Ministry of Corporate Affairs? SFIO should be there with SEBI. When SEBI has a power of search and seizure as well on that, they should be even empowered with SFIO, including the merger. In fact, we have all the takeover guidelines with the SEBI. So if it is a an acquisition, it is with SEBI, but if it is a merger, it is a domain of the court. I think these all things have to be sorted out, that section 391 and 394 should not be a domain of the court. It should go to SEBI, because SEBI has to look into mergers and acquisitions both. It can't be looking at acquisition but not the mergers. So I think somebody should be good enough, should be competent enough to even tell the government to really amend the SEBI Act to give more powers to SEBI to look into all these aspects of the corporate governance and also these kind of issues of administration nature.
Yes, absolutely. But I'm afraid on a subject like this we could go on, and 30 minutes is just not enough. But whoever comes next to head SEBI, man or woman, he clearly has his or her hands full. But on that note, I must call an end to this discussion. Thank you very much, Mr. Pai, Sandeep and Anil, for joining me in this discussion. Thank you also for watching. Remember, we'll be back next week with yet another edition of Macros with Mythili. Till then, it's thank you and goodbye from all of us at ET Now.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/etnow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at etnowlive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/etnow.